inception of the new government. Yet, many questions remain stagnant in the mind of the general public. Will there be a new constitution? Will there be a local government election this year? Will there be the formation of a new political party? And what mechanism will the government of Sri Lanka follow in terms of the Geneva Resolution? Hello and welcome. This is Vantage Point here on Newsfirst on TV1. I am Shahin Jurampati and we are joined by Dr. Dayan Jayatilaka, former diplomat and political scientist. Hello Doctor, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Shahin.
Dr. Jayatilaka, a couple of days ago speaking to the BBC and Al Jazeera, President Maithripala Sirisena said that there have been no war crimes committed in Sri Lanka during the final stages of the war, and that there will be no international tribunal, no international court, no international judges. It will be a completely domestic judicial mechanism. However, speaking to Channel 4 and at the Asia Regional Seminar for Members of Parliament, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe says that Sri Lanka in no way will deviate from the Geneva Resolution. How do you view these two statements made by the President and the Prime Minister?
Well, this is a fundamental philosophical and strategic difference between President Sirisena and Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, supported by his Foreign Minister, Mr. Mangala Samaraweera. This is at the heart of the issue, and it will all come out into the open when High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid Al Hussain, visits Sri Lanka starting on the 6th of February and ending up on the 9th of February. There are two completely different perspectives. President Sirisena, I think, has the right one. And it's not a new perspective. It's not something that President Sirisena is saying because he has trouble in the Sri Lanka Freedom Party or because local government elections are near. Now, why do I say this? Because what he told the BBC and Al Jazeera at length is what he told the BBC Sandeshya and the New York Times briefly way back last year. On his first visit to London, he was interviewed by the Sandeshya and he said pretty much what he said this year. And the New York Times interviewed him after Mr. Mangala Samaraweera had agreed that Sri Lanka will co-sponsor the Geneva Resolution, the US resolution, on the instructions given to him by Prime Minister Wickremesinghe. The President, speaking in the New York Times, said, I am not in agreement with foreign participation, with foreign judges. So, this is an old stand of President Sirisena's. He elaborated it at considerable length in two long interviews, and I think he did very well in both interviews. What he's saying is this. He's saying, look, there were two sides to the war. Now I'm quoting or at least paraphrasing. There were two sides to the war. The Sri Lankan army always fought in consonance with international law. There were no orders either from the military or from the then government. He said this. From the then government in violation of international law. The Tigers, on the other hand, were terrorists and they consistently waged war contrary to international law. He said all this to Al Jazeera. And he said if there were crimes, these were individual crimes. And he went on to say, both to the BBC and to Al Jazeera, that any investigation will be within the existing constitution, the existing laws, the existing system. Now that's interesting. The existing system, that he has full faith in our resources as a country, as a society, as a peoples, to investigate whatever happened, and if people are guilty, that justice will be meted out to them. Now that is President Sirisena's view. The Prime Minister not only told Channel 4 that foreign participation has not been ruled out, and in fact he said yes to the follow-up question as to whether there will be foreign participation. He told this conference that you just mentioned that Commonwealth judges will be present, but not to function as judges, but they will participate and they will be present. And then he told the Sunday Times, Colombo, yes, there will be foreign participation. And Foreign Minister Samaraweera says that, told the EU, visiting EU delegation, that the Geneva Resolution will be fully implemented. Now, they are not on the same page. The Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister are on one page, President Sirisena is on another page. And I think President Sirisena is more or less on the right.
You say that President Sirisena is on the right page.
Yes.
With that being said, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe and Foreign Minister Mangala Samaravira, they do say that this was a unanimous decision taken in Geneva and that this is the decision. So isn't Sri Lanka obliged to the decision in the co-sponsored resolution?
No, in the first place it's dishonest. It wasn't unanimous. The Sri Lankan government decided to co-sponsor it. And that decision was not taken in cabinet. It was not taken with the concurrence of President Sirisena, which is why the same week President Sirisena told the New York Times that he is not in agreement with any foreign participation. So, this was a unilateral decision taken by one part of the government, the UNP, and I wouldn't say even the UNP as a whole, because the UNP as a whole did not discuss this. This was the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister. Now, I'm not being unfair by the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister told Jon Snow of Channel 4, he said, John, I am the one who stuck my neck out in support of the Geneva resolution. So he's taking responsibility. It was his decision. And he gave orders that we should co-sponsor it. Therefore, there was no unanimity. There wasn't a vote. It was a consensus resolution, because no other country, not even our best friends, can oppose what Sri Lanka herself supports. So there was no vote. There was no unanimity. It was a consensus resolution. But what is important is that if you read the list of co-sponsors, it's the West and Sri Lanka, and not even India signed as a co-sponsor, Shaheen. Not even India. Why? Because Asian countries and the countries of the non-aligned movement are opposed to this kind of foreign participation in accountability issues. So even this government's, one of its two best friends, India, chose not to co-sponsor the resolution. So it's entirely dishonest. The government created the situation by jumping on board the US bandwagon, and then it's beaming that back to Sri Lanka saying, hey, this was a unanimous resolution, we are bound by it. We are not bound by it. That's a non-binding resolution to start with. And the decision on accountability, when there's been a war, it wasn't a military junta, it wasn't a military regime, it was a democratic government. Successive democratic governments fought the war using a legally constituted army. It's been 6 years down the road. The enemy was not another country. The enemy was not a bunch of unarmed civilians. It was a very powerful terrorist force. It was defeated. 6 years down the road, the decision on whether we are going to have an accountability hearing and what the shape of that accountability hearing will be is entirely a sovereign decision to be taken by the President, the Parliament, and maybe even the people at a referendum. That is the way in which the sovereignty of the people is expressed according to the Sri Lankan Constitution. So, that is, it's not a decision of the UN Human Rights Council. UN Human Rights Council decisions, that's not a world government. It's a Parliament of Human Rights. The final decision remains with the sovereign people of Sri Lanka, who express and wield their sovereignty through the institutions of the presidency, the parliament, and directly at plebiscites or referenda. So that's our decision, and that's what President Sirisena is saying. He has said, I shall not permit, he said it in the BBC interview to Azam, very fine young interviewer. He said, I won't leave room, I shan't allow this. So he's talking as the Commander-in-Chief of the Sri Lankan military and the elected President of the country. He is sworn to uphold under the Constitution the sovereignty of Sri Lanka and to defend its armed forces. And he's trying to do that. Now, how this will play out, we don't know. Whether he will blink or the Prime Minister will blink,
that's exactly
we don't know. We'll be able to see next week when Zaid Al Hussain comes to Sri Lanka.
That's exactly the question, Dr. Jayatilaka. Like I said, that is a question among the people's minds. What mechanism will be used? Because, like as we're speaking right now, the President Sirisena is saying there will be a domestic mechanism, while Prime Minister Wickremesinghe says no. It will be an international assisted mechanism which will be followed to look into alleged war crimes. So the question remains: who should the people believe?
Well, the people have to believe their leader. There aren't two leaders in Sri Lanka. There is one, according to the Sri Lankan constitution.
But then again, it's a consensual government, Dr. Jayatilaka.
It's a consensual government, but finally the buck stops somewhere. And you can't have a headless consensual government. The majority of the people, taken as a whole, the people of this island, voted for a president. And the president makes the final decision. Now, of course, one also has to be practical. The practicality of this is that we have a 300,000 strong armed forces, and therefore 1.5 million people, if you take a minimum of 5 people per family of the armed forces. And that's only at the current moment. If you take the 30-year war, millions of families participated directly or indirectly in the war because their fathers, their sons, their brothers, their nephews fought. Some died, some were injured. So there's a huge armed forces constituency out there in the rural areas. Every village has contributed to this war, to defend the country, to defeat terrorism and separatism. Now, any government that chooses to try the armed forces, bringing in foreign participation, is going to have a problem going back to their neighborhoods, to the villages. At every social function, they are going to have a problem. It's when you agree to something in Geneva, you must know whether you can implement it on the ground. And that is why President Sirisena was correct when he told the BBC, we shall have to examine which recommendations of the Geneva resolution it is possible for us to implement and which ones it is not possible for us to implement. But now he's figured that out because he's a grounded politician, he's an organic politician, he's not, he doesn't represent Colombo. I mean, Prime Minister represents Colombo. He was not elected by the whole people.
Didn't the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mangala Samaraweera themselves say that they will not leave room for the military to be tried?
Well, then who are they going to try? Yoshito Rajapaksa for war crimes. I mean, it's the military and those who gave the orders, the politicians, who will have to be hauled up. Who else is there to? I mean, Velupilla Prabhakaran can't be prosecuted. So who's going to be tried? How are they going to? You're going to have to try the people who fought the war and who gave the orders to fight the war. That's the military and the political leadership. Now, President Sirisena has said that neither the previous government nor the military gave orders in violation of international law, and that if there were misdeeds, these were individual acts by individual soldiers. And he's also said that any investigation will be under the constitution and the existing law through the existing institutions with no participation of outsiders. To Al Jazeera he said we might have to tap into foreign technical knowledge, but there are two. The President said there are two. We don't need outsiders, we don't need personnel, not even for technical assistance, but we may have to tap into knowledge, which is, sending things to institutions and so on. We do that already. So the President is very clear. He's talking about a purely domestic process. That's very different from what the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister are talking about. And we shall see how this plays out, because this really speaks to the issue of which of the two, the President or the Prime Minister, wields a veto on important decisions in this country. And that's the test of who the real leader of the country is, and in which direction this country is heading. This is the test case, this is a crucial issue, because it will also decide the respective fates of the UNP and the SLFP and the dynamics within those parties themselves.
Dr. Dajal, now it's a given that the President and the Prime Minister are of two different views.
Yeah.
So I suppose the people do want to know what will be the original outcome and the final outcome. So what should the President and the Prime Minister do from here on?
Well, it's really very simple. I think practicality is what's most important, not dogma or ideology. We all live here. The President lives here, the Prime Minister lives here. We know what the war was like. We know what happened. We know what the Tigers were like. And we know the sacrifices our army made. We all have to live here. They all have to live here. They don't live in Geneva. They don't live in New York, though their minds, the minds of some of them may be in New York. The Prime Minister talks about the Austrian model of devolution, something else, Commonwealth judges and so on. I mean, I find this faintly ridiculous because he says we've had Commonwealth judges before. I remember I was very much around during the time because I was working with President Premadasa. He brought in retired Commonwealth judges for a probe on the Denzil Kobekadua incident. It was not a court, it was a probe, and it was not on the entire war or a period of the entire war. It was on a specific incident. And furthermore, President Ranasinghe Premadasa had just thrown out 70,000 Indian troops, just asked them to leave. His patriotic credentials were not in doubt, and I can't say the same of the Prime Minister. So what a man like Premadasa could afford to do in terms of getting a retired foreign judge is very different from what somebody who doesn't have that same nationalist and patriotic profile can do and get away with politically.
Dr. Jatulika, let's switch gears from Geneva to matters here at home. Dr. Jatulika, last time we spoke, you said that there is a very low possibility of the formation of a new political party headed by former President Mahinda Rajapaksa.
I didn't say it was very low.
However, things seem to have developed from there on, and things seem to be very much likely so for the formation of a political party. What do you say about that, Dr. Jatulika?
Well, both sides are at fault. That is, the President as well as the former President and the earlier President, Chandrika Bandaranaike Kumaratunga. What this reminds me of is a land dispute between a new owner, the old owner, and an even older owner. And the land dispute usually involves filing plaints with the police and taking people to jail and so on and so forth. So there is this land dispute going on over the ownership of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. But out there on the horizon, you have Ban Ki-moon, Zaid al-Hussein, Samantha Power, the Global Tamil Forum, the New York Times, all talking about the implementation of the Geneva Resolution and insisting on foreign participation. The US ambassador to the HRC in Geneva tweeted that the participation of foreign judges is necessary for the credibility of the Sri Lankan process. That has always been and remains the case. Now, he's lucky that I wasn't his counterpart in Geneva because I would have responded to that. But that's not his business. That's a sovereign decision. Now, that's going on out there. That's the big picture. And here, these guys are locked in a land dispute, basically a political real estate or turf war over the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. The Americans say, you're only as big as what makes you mad. I think we should be mad about the threat of external intrusion rather than about each other. But anyway, that's the way it goes in this place, at least now. I think that the SLP, what is the SLP? The SLP has always been a moderate nationalist party. That's how it was founded. Now, you can have a moderate nationalist party in a national government with a moderate centre-right party, the UNP, but not if that moderate centre-right party is led by far-right pro-Western elements. So then you don't have any common ground. For instance, if the UNP were led by, I don't know, Vijayadasa Rajapaksa or Sajith Premadasa or Karu Jayasuriya or Kabir Hashim or somebody, then it would be far easier for the SLFP to cooperate with it and support President Sirisena. But This UNP is moving so far out in right field that the SLFP, by virtue of being tied up with that UNP, is losing its constituency. Because it can no longer play the role of a moderate nationalist party. If it were a moderate nationalist party, it should be protesting against what's happening on Geneva and privatization and ECTA and the bridge, which Foreign Minister Mangal Samravir confirmed that he and his Prime Minister support. That is, he was talking at an Indo-Sri Lanka Association meeting, a public meeting, and he said, he talked about the bridge over the Pork Strait. Now, I don't think President Sirisena has approved that. Certainly Parliament hasn't. Now, when you have the SLFP tied to the chariot wheel of a runaway UNP, which is running away in one direction to the west and to the right, then you leave behind the constituency of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. And what are they going to do? They're obviously going to form their own party. Now, that being said, I don't agree entirely with what's going on in that camp as well, because it seems to me, strangely, that of what I hear on television, I read in the papers and on social media, that camp of the SLFP dissidents or the breakaway or potential breakaway or whatever, their main enemy now doesn't seem to be Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, but President Maithripala Sirisena. So, I mean, that's why I say it's a land dispute, it's a turf war. It's not based on politics, because neither side is thinking about the bigger picture of the interests of the country, or even what their own, what the people, what the voters say. Because one side is just doing stuff now where the optics are all wrong. And that's not going to help in the intra-SLFP politics. I don't want to discuss those because they are sort of ongoing cases, but the optics are wrong. And the other side is, when you read their stuff, you would think that Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe is the Prime Minister of this country and that he isn't the one who's supporting the Geneva resolution and moving on ECTA and opening up the IT sector and so on and so forth. You would think that there's only Maithripala Sirisena and he's doing all of this stuff. So it's weird. I think both sides are wrong. I think it was inevitable that there would be a tendency to break away, but I don't think that needs to happen. Right now is not the time, because at this moment President Sirisena and the UNP, certainly Prime Minister Wickremesinghe, are not exactly at loggerheads, but there's a differentiation. And the Sri Lanka Freedom Party has dissented. It's not going ahead with Prime Minister Wickremesinghe's fast-track constitutional plan. That's why it's stuck. There's no date for Parliament to resume to discuss this. The joint opposition led by Dinesh Gunawardena, led very ably, I might add, by Dinesh Gunawardena, is cooperating with the SLFP and the JVP in blocking the constitutional fast track in Parliament. Now, at that moment, it's not logical to break away and form a new party. You can't be thinking only of the local government elections. I mean, come on, that's important, but it's small.
A quick question. Now, since you brought up leader of the joint opposition, Dinesh Gunawardena, many in the SLFP say that the speculation of the formation of a new political party headed by former President Mahinda Rajapaksa, which will inevitably or by default, as you said on the last show as well, that will break away the SLFP and destroy the SLFP and the political landscape in Sri Lanka. Now, members of the SLFP say that these speculations are not made by members of the SLFP, but in fact by those in the joint opposition who are technically alliances of the UPFA.
No, I think there are SLFP MPs who've gone on television and talked about it. Popular MPs like Prasanna Ranthunga. I mean, it has to be said that if you compare the SLFP guys who are with the government and the SLFP guys who are with the opposition, there are only two that I can think of who are vote getters on the side of the government. That is, of course, President Sirisena is obviously a vote getter. And the other is Dayasri Jayasekara. All the other SLFP guys on that side couldn't even win their I mean, didn't get their own SLFP preference votes. These are, dud coins. So the SLFP isn't there. The SLFP is over here. That doesn't mean that I'm applauding the formation of a new party at this point of time. But that is the reality. What the SLF, the anti-mind, the SLFP, really doesn't represent much of the SLFP. The real weight of the SLFP is on this side, and that's the reality. Now there has to be, look, I can't see how you can have North-South reconciliation if you can't reconcile the two wings of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. I mean, come on. And I don't see how you can move on North-South reconciliation without a broader South-South reconciliation. I mean, you can't, it's nice to release former terrorists, but it's not nice to release former terrorists and lock up, the former president's son. The optics are wrong. I'm not talking about the legality. I can't talk about the legality of it. And in any case, I don't know. But it doesn't communicate itself correctly. So, these two, you need some domestic diplomacy. There has to be some arrangement, some ceasefire, political ceasefire. I don't think even the UNP will finally benefit from this. I remember the period of President Jayawardena, where they removed Mrs. Bandanayaka's civic rights. And one of the reasons was that Mrs. Bandanayaka had, with or without her own direct instruction, jailed Mr. Jayawardena's son Ravi Jayawardena during the 1971 uprising, and he had to eat off a tin plate. Jaya never forgot that, and he took revenge by removing Mrs. B's civic rights. Now that didn't help him either, because when he was trying to move on ethnic reform. He needed the SLFP with him. He needed Mrs. Bandanayaka with him to give legitimacy to it, but he had removed her civic rights, therefore the SLFP was not in the mood to support him. And when he restored her civic rights in January of '86, it was already too late. She'd never joined him, even in roundtable discussions, to put through the provincial councils. So, it never helps political victimization or the perception of political victimization, pushing your opponent to the wall, especially when you have bigger threats, bigger dangers, more complex issues such as constitutions, Geneva Resolution, and all of that to handle. It makes for turbulence. It makes for instability.
Well, Dr. Jayawardena, I could talk about these matters all day long with you, but however, with regret I say we've run out of time. Let us, Dr. Jayawardena, what will transpire over the coming days in Sri Lanka? We'll keep a close watch. For the Newsfirst team, I'm Shanjuran Pati. Thank you very much, Dr. Jayawardena.
Thank you, Shaheen. Thank you.
This has been Vantage.